It doesn't have to move mountains. It doesn't have to. It's really just you taking the first, smallest, easiest action towards your vision. And that has massive implications that you can't even fully understand, because you have declared to yourself and you have declared to the universe and the world that you are doing this.
Yes. This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles,
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art. Here we are, everybody. On way.
I told Evan, we need to think about how we start these things off.
No, and I'm like, no, we don't.
Welcome. That's what I get. I deserve that.
Yeah, that's exactly what's going to happen. That's how the universe works. It's karma. Welcome, everybody, to Way of the Artist. This is episode number 4. And episode 4, this one here, after a fantastic kind of trilogy, like kind of a planned trilogy that we put together of episodes, we're kind of now moving into the vast soup of everything now. Mm-hmm. You know, we're going to start really diving into some things, and today we're talking all about beginning, or the law of beginning, which we've kind of touched upon in one of our previous ones, but now we're really going to kind of get our hands dirty.
Yeah, and so just so you know, we're not a bunch of pretentious assholes.
Or maybe we are.
Maybe we are. But the whole thing about the laws, we're going to give you guys these laws of the creative path, the creative journey, you know, the creative way. Are things that are these little wisdoms that have kind of come up through the many podcasts we did before this podcast.
Mm-hmm. And talking to lots of different artists and creative types and these things that kept on cropping up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we kind of, we were thinking, should we call them laws? Should we call them principles? You know, should we call them something else? We were like, well, let's just call them, they're kind of like these laws. They're kind of these things that, you know, they're like the laws of nature. You just kind of, they just happen to be everywhere. And it's not like any of us made them up. It's just like, you got to begin somewhere. You just have to. It's
just one of those things, like you can't get around it. And these are laws as in like laws of nature in a way, laws of creative nature.
Yes.
I guess we could
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. That
you know, and I think the other thing I want to say too is on this law of beginning, which is kind of nice because it is kind of the first law we're presenting, the beginning one.
It seemed appropriate.
You know, everything is still, though, in the middle of something, ironically.
Yes.
And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as we move forward, is that our experience of a new beginning is where this law kind of comes in. It's like when you begin, and I think the beginning has a lot to do with kind of like change. You know, it's like when you've been kind of going along a certain way and then you begin something new, it's like this little detour, this little kind of turn in the road.
Yeah.
This, you know, maybe if you want to take a road trip, you know, analogy, you're driving down the highway and you see this beautiful kind of way you could go, or you need to take a detour to get where you want to go, and you go down this other way and you try this thing out and you explore this thing that you maybe haven't seen before. And the law of beginning really kind of begins in this new adventure that you're about to go on, something that maybe wasn't as predictable as you might have thought. Sometimes it is a little predictable, but it's new and it's a bit of an adventure, and that's what kind of makes it exciting. Mm-hmm. And we resist sometimes, I think, the law of beginning because we're scared of the unknown, and we're scared of like, well, I don't want to fail, blah blah blah, all this sort of stuff. We're going to get into it.
Beginning is, I think you said this in like the first episode that we recorded. I thought it was really pretty spot on. You had said beginning is both the easiest and most difficult thing to do. And I'm just going to quickly kind of define this a little bit. We kind of jot some of this stuff out here every now and then about some of these laws. So The law of beginning, let me just read this out to you. In order for us to realize or create anything, it is imperative that we begin. All caps on that one, on the begin.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
All of the thinking and pondering in the world is no substitute for getting started in a real way. The law of beginning says, don't get stuck too long in trying to figure everything out, because you never will. So that's just that's just like, now obviously we're going to dive into this, we're going to explore this even more, but that's just kind of to give us kind of a base point to jump off from here. And there's a lot to unpack with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think with the law of beginning, it's a little bit of a leap of faith in some ways, and it's a little bit of a it's kind of like taking a chance on yourself a little bit, taking a chance on something that matters to you. If you guys haven't yet listen to the first 3 episodes, because they're gonna set up, or they have set up, kind of the basis of everything we're getting into. But in the first one of the 3, we talked about finding your path, and in some ways, finding your path and embracing your path and all of that is kind of where the beginning starts. It's kind of like, once you actually go, okay, well, I'm going to go and start going down this way, beginning is present. And I think the thing is I always like to lock a beginning in. And I think with beginning, beginning kind of becomes real the moment you take action. And action comes from kind of a decision. And so I think whenever you make a decision, you also want to, take an action with that decision. You know what I mean? I think that's...
Yeah, and those are a couple of things, like, and there are lots of different people, and we were talking about this earlier today. It's like we're just sort of like we just are sort of communicators of this stuff. We didn't invent these things, and there's lots of other people who are communicating similar stuff to us. We just kind of have our way of doing it. But that what you're saying, there's similar stuff that other people have talked about. So the law of beginning, some other things you might have heard that called, we kind of think it entails a couple of components for us, but like you might have heard other people talk about this as this is the law of action, or we could also call it the law of engagement, or as you said a second ago, the law of decision. And these are all kind of related. Beginning is about deciding to engage and take action.
Yes.
Like it's kind of a buildup of all of those things. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The other thing I want to say too is, I feel like we're doing a lot of setup, but I feel this is important, to filter this through the rest of the conversation. Something I usually point out to people when I'm working with them on a coaching thing or something like that is I always try to remind people that, like, this first step that you take is usually the loneliest step you'll take as well. It's the hardest and the easiest, and sometimes the loneliest. And the reason why it's the hardest is because you're usually in an inertia of going down a certain way. You have a certain momentum, a certain path, a certain comfortability. And it's hard because you got to break out of that. That's what's hard about it.
Yeah.
It's easy because it's actually not that hard to do the first step. It's actually a really physically, you're capable of it. It's, if you figure out what it is, it's actually quite simple.
Yeah.
And if you get over the emotional inertias of being stuck in momentum,
there's a lot of energy in that, in making that decision. Mm-hmm. In some ways, I think that's a huge component of the whole part of beginning, is that it is setting into motion. It is sending the ripples out from this step that's being taken. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of energy behind beginning, in as and while we can make it kind of we can make it too big in our minds, because it is a huge step. It is arguably the most important step, is the first one. But we can put different kinds of importance on it that are not actually so important. It's important in the sense that we have made the choice, that we have really fully committed to doing something. I think that's a huge part of what that first step is all about.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be precious either. I mean, I think the first step could be, it can be simple. It's simply, and we're going to get into this, the law of simplicity and the law of vision and how they relate to this. We'll get into that later, in other podcast episodes. But it is simple. If you know where you're going, take a step towards that direction. A simple, easy thing that you need to do right now, and that will get you at least started going and looking down that path a little bit. The other thing, and I didn't quite finish there, is the loneliest step. The reason why I have, in my experience, found it to be the loneliest step most often is because most of your friends and your colleagues and your family and everybody else sees you as one way. And they see life as one way, and they do life as one way. And if they're not already stepping out on their own to go do something, it can be a lonely step because you literally kind of step outside of the crowd for a moment. You step outside of the safety of the anonymousness of being a part of a group. And all of a sudden, when you take that first step, people notice and they go, "What are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing? You're stepping out of line here."
Yeah.
And it can be kind of like, I'm going my way.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you can't do that. We do this way.
Yeah. But I mean, even then, it's like there are other people are often, they're still only seeing you after you've taken a couple of steps. They're like, "You're doing what?"
Yeah.
Because usually that decision to go out and step out and create something, to go out and do this thing that's in you, this music, this play, this whatever the hell it is, this film, it's something that starts with you, and your decision to do it probably began with you on your own to some degree. There are a few occasions where we've had moments in our life where we're just like connected with a group of people and are like, "Are we gonna all do this?" And everyone's like, "Yeah, let's all do this." And even then that a lot of times that just all falls apart. I'm sure you can relate to those scenarios. Where everyone's excited about it in the 1 second, then the next day everyone's like, "Oh yeah, well." But normally it's like and normally these things, they begin with just us, and that was what came to my mind when you said it's the loneliest step. In a way, but it's also that's what also makes it one of the most empowering steps to do. There's nobody clapping and applauding you for being like, "Yeah, way to go." Sometimes we have our supporters. We might have, if we're fortunate, we have a few people around us who are like, "Yes, do it." People who are just fired up for us. But the accolades and the applauding, that all comes at the end. But that is only like important because of that first lonely step, like that first one. It's like when you're at that point where people are just like, "Wow, you did this thing." Like that's really only important because you can remember back to that moment where you were in your bedroom or you were crying on the street one night, just like walking out and just being like, "I'm doing this. I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care. I'm doing this. And that's like it's almost as beautiful. It's an equally as beautiful a moment as when the people are like, "Oh my God, you're a genius."
Beginnings are a funny thing too, and I'm sure people can relate to this. Beginnings are either chosen or forced upon you. It's funny because I always have preferred to choose beginnings, but sometimes they have been forced upon me.
Yeah.
And when they're forced upon me, they're usually not as comfortable.
Yeah.
And usually when they're forced upon you is like when you get fired from a job, or when things in your life, you just get so fed up with the way things are going, or that relationship ends, or it's just like the way you're doing life is just so friggin' annoying or not complete, and you're like, "Okay, I can't handle any more of this. I'm going to do this thing." And so then you get agitated enough to take that. But I think that you can wait until you get yourself into enough pain, enough agitation to start this law of beginning. But I think it's actually more advantageous and better for your just mental health to actually consciously decide to just start. Even though the world or the universe isn't forcing you to, you're going to go do it because you want to. And the reason why I think it's so important is because you're going to express your will in the world.
Yeah.
And there's something empowering about that.
Yeah, and also because, you begin to recognize that this is what's happening. Like for myself, because I would say more often I have been forced into new beginnings than I have chosen them. But the moments that I've chosen them are definitely way better, and but it's learning to recognize these things, right?
Yes.
The whole old adage of like one door closes, another one opens, right? That's kind of like beginning is very similar in that way. It's like we can look at something being like, what the hell's going on, and just wait for everything to get slammed in our faces, or say like, okay, I guess I'm going in a different direction now, right? We can really get in touch and in tune with ourselves and being like, all right, well, what is this saying? What do I really, when we have the consciousness to ask ourselves some questions and kind of go back to our sense of purpose, our what do we want, and bring that stuff back into the fold and let that direct us and say, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm going to go this way now. And then we choose our beginning as opposed to waiting a couple of months or years
or decades
for things to get so painful that we finally make that new beginning. So it's to me, it's like beginning is like it's a force. That was another word we used when we were talking about these things, these laws. But it is a force of nature that like we can really work with.
I think the other thing too is like, as human beings, we have a very special power in the world. We have the ability to be conscious, to be creative, to use our minds in a way that is, and not all of us have necessarily recognized how powerful this actually is, but we have this ability to vision. We have this ability to imagine, this ability to, take past knowledge and future concepts and put them all together. And so when we make a beginning, we make a movement in the world, and we might not even realize the effects or impacts it has on the world. And I think when it comes to that, just to bring it back to that loneliest step, I don't think you should ever fear loneliness. I think loneliness is a temporary experience. It's something that I've gone through my periods of loneliness. I have embraced a lot of new beginnings. Sometimes you have the supporters and the people encouraging you, but when you're going off and doing something that people don't necessarily know can be done yet, or seems weird or seems odd, it usually is met with a lot of kind of questions and a lot of like worry and fear from people. And sometimes something different can be kind of threatening, and so the thing is that this is one of those moments where you kind of just got to follow your heart. The other thing too is with this whole thing is like, if you got to step out on your own, remember that you stepping out on your own is what separates you from everybody else. It's what gives you a certain sense of identity in the world, because it's, we are social creatures. We actually thrive by working together more than we do alone. But sometimes we actually have to step out alone before we can work together on something. Yeah. And I really wanted to point that out, because the thing is loneliness is temporary. You will eventually bring the people on board with your vision. They will come and they will join you, but you may have to spend some time on your own, going down that road, being kind of crazy enough to go down that road on your own for a little bit.
Yeah. And that really, and it builds so much strength in us. It builds our creative power, I think, when we can embrace it as kind of an uncomfortable space as that can be to operate in. They always temper us and make us sharper and make, what I mean? It's in those kind of solitude moments where we're still pushing through with things that we really start to figure out who we are and what we want to do and what we want to create more of. It's an ongoing process, that whole thing.
You raise a good point too, because when you're off on your own, you're not being as influenced, if you allow yourself to have that piece of that peace of mind in your own doing is like you don't necessarily have the influences of your peer group or your parents or or your teachers or whatever. And I mean, I believe my personal opinion is that we all have a genius state. We all have an inner or whatever, some type of way in which we can transfer geniusness through ourselves, like this sense of personhood or this sense of like individual authentic creativity, which is genius, and it's this way of seeing the world or doing the world that is just ours. And I don't think we always realize how special that is. I don't think we realize how incredible that is. But until you step out on your own, you might never actually get to know what that is. And because it's yours and yours alone, whatever it is, probably in some ways no one else is really doing it or done it, especially not recently. And so you're going out there on your own, you're bringing something to the surface or something to the light that's you. And I think what's hard about it sometimes is that sometimes you're going to have people actually literally mock you for being like, who do you think you are? Or that idea is stupid or something. But that's where you kind of got to be steadfast and just kind of be like, no, I'm going to go try this out. Maybe it won't work, but there's a saying that I recently heard, and I don't remember what it was exactly, but it was like, there'll always be opinions, but truth is always stands where opinions will fall. You know what I mean? So you got to trust your truth. Don't worry about all the opinions. There will be lots of people that have opinions. If you're being truthful on that beginning step, that's all you really need. I think the thing is like, but we often don't make beginning steps because we're worried about either someone else's opinion or our opinion of our truth. Yeah.
Man, you brought up a lot of stuff in there. It was fantastic. Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff in this one.
So we wrote down a couple of questions here, as far as like some things that kind of can assist us in this whole thing of beginning. And these are fairly practical questions. I don't know how much time we'll spend on these, but we'll go into it. So like the first question to me about beginning is, what is the first step available to me now? Just like it, and that brings in this whole thing of just like, what is simple? What is kind of even the easiest thing to do? Because I feel like with beginning, you want to do whatever is the easiest tangible step, right? Just because the whole, for lack of a better term, the whole mindfuck of beginning a new endeavor, right? Because I think that's what the big thing is with beginnings, is that it's not just the start, it's that you've now elicited a whole journey that's going to like follow it too, right? Which is why it's so crucial to be centered in your purpose, to be centered in what you want, because otherwise you're walking somebody else's path, or you're walking a path that really is not authentically yours. So when you're connected to that, now you're making a beginning step, saying it's like, okay, well, this is heading me, I believe, into a direction that is in alignment with what I want to be doing and what I want to be creating in the world, and with what gives me a sense of meaning and purpose in my life. So I think that that's a huge part of it, is just like knowing that it's like, yes, it is more than just the first step, but that first step means the rest of it.
Right.
Like it means you've committed to doing something that's going to require more time and more effort. But it's necessary. There's no way of getting around it. There's no skipping steps here.
No.
Like you have to do it. You have to take every single step that's going to get you there. There's no jumping ahead.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because we were talking about that before pre-talk, about how don't ever believe anybody online or in the world who says that they have some kind of shortcut. There are no shortcuts. There just are none. You will there, and there's another saying which I love. There's no free lunch. there is no point where you don't have to pay your own way, where you don't have to eventually, the currency, the exchange is always going to be there.
Yeah.
And so like you might be able to leap across a few steps or get a head start or start somewhere else, but eventually you're going to have to take certain steps. It's just you're going to have to face up to it. And if you don't, you won't get that part of the journey. And I think the thing is like when it comes to beginning, you kind of got to be honest about where you're at, because there's this whole thing too, is like sometimes people don't begin because they're like, well, my first step has to be this miraculous, special, unbelievable thing that's so incredible, and it's like,
let go of that whole notion.
Yeah. And the other thing too is when it looks like someone has taken a first step that's miraculous and incredible, it's usually because they took another 10,000 steps before that, which got them to that step, and now you're just seeing them make that one step.
Yeah.
And it looks like their first step was perfect, but it was like, no, that was built on a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
Like it was interesting. Like, so for example, when I was younger, I used to play soccer, right? And so I played for pretty high division teams, and we trained really hard. We trained twice a week. We went and flew across the world to do tournaments and all sorts of stuff. And, our coaches were merciless, with training us. So we were super fit. We were very well trained, and we won provincial cup. We were like great, right? And then later after that team, I became the captain of my next team because they trained me so well that I was able to captain the next team I was on, because that's how good we were. We were the pinnacle of the league, right? But when I got into hockey, which I didn't really get into hockey until after soccer, I started hockey and I was quite good at hockey, like quite good at ice hockey. But the thing is that you have to factor in the fact that how trained I was as a soccer player. It's not like, sure, soccer, hockey are different, but the thing is like all the fitness we had, all the discipline we had, the ability to go head to head with a defender as a forward, the ability to understand angles on a goalkeeper and things like that. These are all
the technical things,
right.
but I'm sure to a large degree as well, like the other more fundamental things like working in a team.
Sure.
Working as a team, how you fit in and playing your position. Like there's just like even bigger things like that you're just like life lessons. People talk about that all the time. Like sports teach amazing life lessons.
Right.
Anyhow, continue.
Well, and so my point was that I started hockey in and I grew quite quickly at my development skills in it, mostly because I already had a lot of sports training to call from. I already had worked with high division coaches.
Yeah.
So you could coach me on anything really. I knew how to work with a high division coach. Of course, like when I started ice hockey, I was not really that great at stopping. There's certain technical things about, just being on the ice that I wasn't good at. But, those were little things that I could learn. We already worked on little details in soccer. So, how to do a slide tackle properly and not even hit the guy, but totally steal the ball from him. There's things like that I could take into these checks with people, where I could go into a check and without even being too concerned about hitting the person, I could come in and take the puck by turning my body and figuring out how to cut an angle. You know what I mean? Anyway, long story short, I had a friend, him and his dad, they got me into hockey, right? And my friend was a high division hockey player. And so when I started, I was kind of this noob I wasn't, that great necessarily in the beginning, but my improvement was like skyrocketing. And my friend was getting super jealous, and he was like, I've trained so hard at hockey and you just come in and you're like, playing on these teams like, and it was like, at the time I was younger, so I didn't really wasn't able to articulate this back to him, but I've thought much about that. And I was like, well, it was like, he was upset because he felt I was growing faster than he was, even though we were training the same.
Yeah.
But it was like, first of all, I was learning more than he was because it was new to me. Secondly, I was calling on a secondary sport and other sports that I had done to bring into it. So my point is that in the law of beginning, you might begin something, but it might not necessarily be your first step entirely. You know what I mean? Because you're calling on other mediums. So like, you know, you see these actors who are 30-something years old, 40-something years old, 80 years old, I've seen people, and all of a sudden they're just so great. And you're like, they had all this life to call on too. So their first acting class is not the same as the 12-year-old's first acting class or the 18-year-old's first acting class.
Yes.
Because they might have some life or some experience to call on. And so that's why when in the law of beginning, you got to be very careful not to compare yourself to others. Is my point.
You bring up a thing, and I think this is actually another one of our laws that we have that comes to mind here from your story, which is humility.
Oh yeah.
You know, I'm sure a big part of the reason I'm here on just pure conjecture on my part here, but you know, your friend's getting so upset because you're developing so quickly, and I go, it's like, well, it's probably because you also had a fair dose of humility.
That's true.
You're coming into it being like, yeah, you've got your side, but you're not directly necessarily being like, oh yeah, this is exactly the same thing, you know, like, yeah, you can translate, but for the most part, you're to a large degree, you're like, okay, like I am an open sponge. I am open to learning everything that you have to teach me, right? You know, that's a huge part of it, and this has terrific implications as far as what we're talking about here with beginning, and how humility is such a big, taking that humble first step of being like, okay, you know, maybe you have that feeling of, well, who am I?
Yeah, who am I to do this?
Who am I to do this? But you know what? Like, you can take that, you know, that can be a thing that we use to hold us back. We can take it and transmute it into actually a very powerful force in that beginning step of being like, well, who am I? Well, I'm going to take this first step.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, who am I? Well, you're a person taking the first step.
Yeah.
And that's good enough for now. Right? Taking that first step. And from that place, we can become so much more open to receive and to see the things that are being offered to us, you know, as we're moving along, right? Then if we're really rigid and being like, okay, I'm going to do this, put my head down, I know how to do this, blah, 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 you know, often that's a good way to get, you know, kind of slapped around a little bit, you know, is thinking that we know. And beginning has, I'm realizing a huge part of it is kind of that, like, I don't know, you know, and we actually, I guess we did talk about that a little bit in the first one about the unknown.
Yes.
You know, beginning, unknown has a big part in all of this as well.
I think we're going to start seeing that a lot of these laws have these wonderful, interesting relationships to each other, because we're going to get into the law of the unknown in a future episode, and we're going to get into the law of humility. And
but they'll all be kind of mentioned with all these other ones too, because they're
And it's neat that you brought the parallel in, because that really was what it was like for me. Because the other thing for me is, because I was so new when I started hockey, I didn't necessarily need to be good. You know, which was real like kind of nice, because everyone was going out there trying to prove themselves, you know. But for me, I was going out there having to skate, trying to learn. So for me, there was a relaxation to it. There was a certain kind of ease, and there wasn't as much expected of me, because it was like, hey, we brought out Brandon, you know, he's my friend, you know, he's new to hockey, and I'm playing with these AAA guys and stuff, you know, and like, and you know, and I'm keeping up with them, and I could do no wrong. I mean, basically, it's like, hey, he's doing pretty good. So even though I was probably not even playing like at that level in the beginning, the thing is like, hey, you're keeping up, you're moving the puck, you're passing it and keeping it, you know, in your zone. You're learning. You're when the coach says, you know, get in the corner, make sure you get on the blue line, you know, whatever, go to the net. I'm doing it because I'm listening, because I'm like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. You know what I mean? Like, and so then the thing is like, that's the other thing with beginning, and I like how you brought up this law of humility. When you begin, if you take the pressure off yourself and you be like, I don't even have to be good at this, I can just start, you know, then the thing is like, think about how wonderful your life gets. Well, I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Like, and when I teach, when I work with actors in my class, like one of the first things that comes out in the exercises I take people through is this thing to be right. There's this. It's one of the first things that comes out is everybody's need to be right and to do it right, and it's one of the first obstacles. Like I say that, like, an actor's biggest problem isn't a technical one, it's a human one. And it's very much a human issue of, like, I need to do this right. And, you know, that can drive us, I think, to a certain point, but there's so much egotism involved with this whole idea of doing something right, as opposed to striving for excellence, which when we make it's a subtle but powerful shift in perspective on it, whereas right is a very rigid and closed off stance, and it doesn't leave much room for us to learn and for us to grow.
It has a lot of expectation.
It has a lot of expectation on ourselves and on others, and it really creates more stress and challenge on us than there needs to be. Whereas opposed to going for excellence, you know, keeps us in an open state, keeps us open to new ideas, keeps us open to receive something new. But yeah, it's a fascinating thing in the human psyche that goes on with that.
Totally. You know, okay, so I was thinking to the next question we had.
Yes, did we even answer that first one? Like, what is the first step available to me now? I guess that's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, what is the easiest first step you can take right now? It doesn't have to move mountains. It doesn't have to, it's really just you taking the first, smallest, easiest action towards your vision. And that has massive implications that you can't even fully understand, because you have declared to yourself and you have declared to the universe and the world that you are doing this.
Yes.
That's massive.
Yes.
In and of itself. And then you've put some kind of action to it.
I would also say, just to further this question, is if you can take a step towards your vision, take a step that leads you towards that. So, for example, if it's like, I want to be an actor, pick up a play and read it, or pick up an acting book and read it. Go to the bookstore and get an acting book if you don't have one. You know, go sign up for an acting class. Go audit an acting class. Whatever that thing is. Practice some lines in the mirror. Just do something towards that, right? But sometimes, you know, you're going to be in those situations where it's not so clear. Like, you don't know what the first step is. You don't know which way will actually get you closer to that. My thing is just take a step. Anyway, take a step somewhere. Yeah. You know, get moving. Anything other than what you're doing is enough sometimes.
It's like, what's the first thing that occurs to you?
Yes.
That you might be able to do right now? Well, do that.
Because, like, in the position you're in, you might not have the perspective that you need to see where you need to go. So sometimes stepping left or right or even backwards gives you a new perspective. And then you see, oh, now I see where I need to go. And then your second step is more revealing, or your third or fourth, right? So I think in the law of beginning is sometimes it just comes down to just get moving, just do something. But if you can, try to head towards a direction that is calling to you, something that, you know, makes sense or feels right. And keep it simple. It doesn't need to be a big thing. I mean, I think the goal of beginning is to get moving. Yes. To get moving in a different direction, or get moving, period.
Yeah.
The second step, and this is where we're going to get probably more into the law of momentum, which we'll get into later. But is what is my next best step? Because I think sometimes you've already started, like, you know, for you and I mean, we've been acting for a long time, screenwriting for a long time. If I was going to say write a script right now, I need to bring in the law of beginning, because if I'm going to start a new script, I need to begin it, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, sometimes you just go, well, what is my next best step? It's like, well, do I rewrite a script I already have? Do I sit down and write a concept out? Do I need to go for a walk and ponder about a character, right? You'll know, but I think the next best step is kind of like, what's the easiest, simple, most make sense solution to what you need to do right now? And I think, like, with this particular question, I think the tendency is just that people get, they complicate it too much. you know. I think this is where the law of kind of simplicity, which I know we're referring to all these future episodes, but that's what's going to kind of come in, is like what's simple, what's easy, what's present, what's now.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can just touch on all of these things right now and like and put a little bit of the colors of these laws in, you know, because they help us to kind of shape this as this conversation is unfolding. But yeah, the thing I like about this is like, what is the next best step? That's a continuous question, you know. So it's like, okay, I've done this step. All right, what is the next best step? Okay, it looks like it's this one. You do that. Okay, now what is the next best step? You know, it's a cycle, you know, and it's repeated over and over and over again until you reach the end of it and go, oh, holy shit, here we are.
Yeah,
that's the whole thing about it, because like every journey is full of kind of like the big sort of beginning, and then it's full of a bunch of like tiny beginnings, beginning on this now, beginning on this now, beginning on this now, beginning on this, until you've reached the ending, you've reached the summit, as you will. But you can't just jump to the summit.
No,
you know, it's like, and so it's just keeping in sight all of these little beginnings along the way, all of these little next steps along the way. Well, just what is the thing that's literally right in front of you? Because the big picture can get so overwhelming when, like, the big picture is amazing from the conceptual stage. That's such a huge part of it, to see this thing that stirs you and that you want to create. And then when it comes to putting it to reality, you kind of have to take your eye off of that for a second. You know, like you keep it in that ideal realm, you know, of that beautiful vision. But you can't really take that as you now turn it into the beginning, as you take it into the actual steps and the reality, because suddenly you go, holy shit, there's so many steps to get there. There's so many things that have to come together to reach that.
Yeah, and you hit overwhelm, and you don't want to do anything.
And hit overwhelm. So that's why it's about keeping whatever the next thing is in focus. I guess we'll probably cover more of this when we do momentum, because this has a lot to do with the momentum side of things.
Yeah.
But this is an important question for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the other thing too is when you're starting out, you know, if you kind of look at every step as like it's, you know, a beginning step, right? Like beginning is kind of like it's your first step, and it's like your first series of steps too, in a sense. And so, you know, the beginning is kind of a wonderful time because, you know, there's not a lot expected, and it's a lot of discovery, and it's a lot of just kind of finding stuff. And so I think really with this law, to really get the most out of it, is for you to just simply go, I'm going to enjoy exploring. I'm going to enjoy venturing out a little. Think about it this way. It's like you walk out of your house and you go, I'm going to walk down this road a little ways, and then I'm going to see what stores and what houses and what people are over here. And then you go, you know what, I'm going to turn left and I'm going to walk down this road a little ways. But the thing is like you walk a few blocks, you're not that far from home. You can always go back. In the beginning of whatever you're about to do, you could always go back. But what you probably find is that you get a few blocks away and you're going to discover something cool somewhere. And then you're going to be like, I don't want to go back home yet. I want to hang out here and explore this a little bit. And then you'll get into a whole new series of wonderful things that will, you know, expose you to in our, you know, in our theories of how this creative journey unfolds. But in this time, you're just leaving home, the comfort of home a little bit, and exploring something that's a little outside of your realm right now.
Absolutely.
So don't make it that big of a deal.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a beautiful little thing. That's like a great little sort of easy to do exercise that can kind of give us a grounded sense of what beginning is all about, and as well as some of its, you know, related like laws that come with it. You know, just walking down a street in your neighborhood that you haven't walked down before, you know, that kind of embodies a little bit of what beginning's about. It seems kind of trivial, it seems kind of too simple, but there's all of these amazing things that can be discovered that way. There's something that you haven't seen before. As mundane as it might seem. Maybe it's super mundane. You're like, oh, okay, well, that was just whatever. Well, then it was just whatever. Right? Now you go down a new street. Now you go down a new path. Now it's not unknown anymore. And in some ways, when you discover that it's just kind of like a mundane thing, that's almost a victory. Because then you can at least go, oh, man, I got so worked up over all of that. And it was fine.
Yeah.
But more often than not, I find it's like there's something interesting to see. There's something interesting to at least, like you said, explore. Exploration is a huge, huge, huge part of creativity.
Yeah. And I think like part of the journey that you're on, I think when we take on a journey, and, this is the artist's, way of the artist, right? It's like we're going our own way. We're going on a journey. We're on this path that we found and embraced and are claiming. Right? We're going down this thing. I think the one of the big things that our current culture and society struggles with, and it's something that it agitates me. It bothers me. Is that we're taught that we need to always be making progress. And we always need to be getting closer to where we need to be or where we think we need to be. Otherwise, we're wasting time, which is not true. The thing is, the destination is a beautiful, wonderful thing. It's a wonderful part of a journey, but it is not the journey. It's just a small part of the journey. And I think we get so caught up and wrapped up in these destinations that we forget that in the journey that is sometimes way off and going totally off the direction that you think you're headed, is that you get to experience and explore these new things. But one of the great things that happens is you get to experience and explore yourself as you do the journey. And that's actually what's really the most important. And I think anybody who has ever done any great feat, as much as everyone else looks at them and says, wow, you accomplished this thing or you did this thing, the real victory that occurred for them was the person that they discovered themselves to be on the journey. The internal self-fulfilling thing. And in our society, we don't really talk about that. We kind of talk about like, oh, you got the money or the house or the reward, but we don't always talk about how like you became the person that you wanted to be, or you became someone you never knew you could be. Yeah.
And it goes back to that whole thing of it's like that first lonely step.
Yes.
At the beginning, like. But it's terrific. One thing I wanted to touch on with this was that, with so many of our laws, and we actually haven't gone into it with this one as of yet, which is that there's kind of a micro and macrocosm to all of these things. So, beginning to put this into perspective from what we're talking about, to a large degree, we've been talking very much on kind of like a macrocosm kind of level of this.
What do you mean?
Which is that we're talking about beginning as far as like taking a step out as like, all right, you've made a big life decision to like be an artist. That's kind of like the underlying permeating thing in this, or you've decided to make a radical shift in the way you're doing something. But this also has implications as far as for our work as well as artists, because with we have touched on it a little bit, but for every new thing, every script that we choose to write, every film that we decide to do, every album that we decide to record, it's that law is being enacted as well.
There's so many beginnings.
There's many
in the middle.
Yeah. So it's like there's like the things that we say, okay, there's the big sort of personal things that we go through, personal transformations that have very wide implications for our life that require these beginnings and these steps into beginnings, which kind of makes us feel like we're amateurs all over again, which is a terrific thing, to feel like a beginner all over again. And it's a necessary part, I think, of our human development. But there's also the beginnings that we take as, a practiced, professional as well. It's like, okay, you've written a few scripts, but now this next one's a new beast.
Yes.
This next one is territory you haven't covered yet. You know, this next one has its own discoveries, its own streets that you have been unexplored for you to walk down.
Yes.
You know, so there's these big processes, and then there's these small processes, you know, that are smaller processes, and they meet up, they align in ways, you know. Normally we'll notice that I noticed that the different times in my life where I've been at in my life, the things that when I've created them genuinely out of some kind of a deep need or a deep desire to express something, some story, some, you know, to communicate some type of thing, it had reaches into my life that I didn't even fully grasp until way later. Oftentimes, you know, sometimes I'm aware of some of it, but oftentimes it's like way later I was like, wow, that was such an expression of where I was at that time. And I mean, I don't really have like a point to make out of this other than just making an observation, a personal experience and observation that, you know, our lives and what we create are just they're so linked to each other, and the beginnings that we have in our lives affect the beginnings that we have in our work. You know, like they shift with each other.
You know, I like what you pointed out about the macro micro part of it is like, you know, I shared this story I think earlier, but like, you know, when I was younger, I was going down the road. I was studying to be an architect, and I was in this advanced program, and then I switched one summer and made a film, and I decided I'm going to be a filmmaker. And that was like a change in the trajectory of my life in a certain way. At least it felt like a major shift. You know, and so I begin and I go down the road of being a filmmaker. And then, you know, I make my first film, I make my second, my third, but every film I make is a new beginning within the path of being a filmmaker. And I think, like, you know, this law of beginning, I think sometimes we think of it, as you pointed out, as these major life points, but the law of beginning is happening all the time. It's happening every morning when you wake up, as much as it's happening at these pinnacle times when you're like, should I go to university or should I go travel the world? You know, and you embark on a journey all the time. And I think this law that we've been talking about is something that people can take with them every day if they want, and just be like, you know, I always begin my day by getting up, having a shower, having my coffee, blah, 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 whatever, you know. What if I began my day this way? What if I begin my day by waking up an hour earlier, going for a walk, and then, you know, maybe I go and get a coffee over here, or maybe instead of a coffee today, I do this thing that's different or whatever. And the thing is you break the matrix of the world you created inside of yourself. You know, like,
creating a little bit of disruption intentionally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because I think the law of beginning is kind of like it's kind of the law of breaking your internal mental matrix. You know, your patterns, your comforts, your things that you kind of get into a routine of.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a powerful tool because you can kind of shock your system a little bit. You can kind of wake yourself up. You know, that's what I really like about your education model with teaching. But, you know, the whole using Meisner, it's like it wakes you up. You kind of go, oh, yeah, like I'm present right now. Oh, yeah, like this is happening right now. And I think sometimes the law of beginning is kind of like when you do Meisner, when I've done Meisner, my experience is this. Beginning. It's just like now. Like everything is new all the time. It's always new. And there's something about the law of beginning, which is kind of the law of presence, the law of being here now and going, I could do anything right now. And I think the thing is like sometimes we get caught in routines and we're kind of asleep just going through our routine. I mean, I've done this before. I've literally been driving and I'm driving down the wrong road listening to a song, and all of a sudden I go, oh, wow, I drove the wrong way because I was in the routine of driving to a certain place. Like, I drove to someone's, like, old house, and they're like, no, I moved. And I was like, oh, man, I drove all the way over here because I remember, like, I was on autopilot.
Yeah.
I wasn't present. I was on autopilot driving to their old house, not really thinking about how they lived, how they had moved. And I think, like, this is kind of, the law of beginning is kind of going, like, like, let's look at what we could do at any moment right now. You could begin right now at the end of this podcast, in this very moment of the podcast. You know, the law of beginning is just this superpower that we all have, and we can just enact it at any time. And sometimes it's a major life change, like you said, in a macro way.
Yeah.
We make a major decision, or sometimes it's this micro decision. You know, it's like, I'm just going to do something a little bit differently than I normally do it, just to try and get myself, you know, going down a little bit of a different road, getting a new perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And eventually that leads us to the next macro.
Right.
You know, we macro, and then we micro, and then we macro, and then we micro.
Yeah, until and I think what happens is you do this macro change in your life, this major change, and then that normalizes. And then you need to do some type of other change. Otherwise, your life gets too repetitive, too boring, too routine, right?
And that's our thing. That's our evolution. You know, that's what makes things exciting.
Right. And I think as an artist, you know, and being an artist isn't like a profession as much as it is honoring your true self, like kind of going down your own path, is about embracing change and embracing a self-imposed willed direction. You know, because we talked about earlier how sometimes you get forced beginnings. Yeah. But if you're conscious about, like, I'm going to make a change here. I'm going to consciously, mindfully, willfully make a change. That's you're going to start to see your little superpower in play. And I think it's really great, because you could be going down a road, you know, you're starting to feeling down, you're starting to feel depressed, or something's going on, and you go, you know what? I'm going to begin again. Today, you know, started out as a bad day. Let's start the day over right now. Let's begin again right now, and just get yourself present and go a new way, you know? And then talk about the beer that we have.
Yeah. Yes, let's talk about this beer that we are drinking here.
Yeah, so this is 33 Acres, and it is the Genesis West Coast Hazy IPA, and it's got a cool 7.3% alcohol. But it's a nice smooth drinker. They always knock out winners, in my opinion.
Yeah, they're one of our favorites around here for sure.
For me, they hit it 100%. They're batting at 100%. You know, they're doing great work over there. And you know, it's one thing about 33 Acres. If you're ever in Vancouver, nice little local brewery over here by, I guess, Ontario and 8th or something like that, or Quebec and 8th. They're a nice little cool hangout. They have coffee, they have food. You know, this isn't an advertisement or anything. We just started.
Yeah, they're not paying us.
No, but we just Evan and I. You know, I like to say the story a little bit. You know, we started these podcasts technically in 33 Acres because we would meet up there. We'd write our scripts together. We'd have some beers and some coffees and whatever, and we'd create our little creative magic. And then eventually we're like, we should record our conversations, and then that's how a podcast was born.
Yeah.
Long before this podcast ever came to you. So the beer has been a tradition. We keep going, and it spurs on some great conversations.
Yeah, there's nothing like a great conversation over some delicious suds, as I like to say.
Exactly. Well, what are your final thoughts on this baby?
You know, I guess as far as like last words, the kind of final message I want to leave with this one is just, you know, beginning. I was about to quote Nike here for a second. It's like just a thing of like just do it. You know, like without let's remove the whole sense of like, you know, weird machismo and, you know, like hard edge and all that to it. But there is a sentiment to it that's like, yes, like just do it. Just begin. I don't like it doesn't matter how you begin. It's what's the easiest thing to you right now. Start. Make that decision. That's almost like that's the most important part of the beginning part. You know, is you make that decision. That's the beginning of the beginning. Is you decide that you're going to engage and take action on it. And whatever step is available to you, and whatever's available to you now. I don't care if that just means, you know, if you've got a book, I don't care if that's just the title. You put the title at the top of a page and that's it. Mm-hmm. For today. That's beginning. You've chosen to begin this thing. Mm-hmm. that's like just and I want to just impart this aspect of this whole thing. If you're sitting here and you're still listening to us, thank you. And you're going, oh my God, like they're telling me just to begin, and I've had this idea and I'm still feeling freaked out about this. I just want to say, it's like, look, you are safe. You are safe to do this. You are safe to make this decision. You are safe to pursue this. You are. And just one final thought on this is, what is preventing you from not taking this step? Because if this is something that is, if this is in your heart, if this is in your soul, if this is something that you want to do, then what are you waiting for? There's nothing more important. There is nothing more important to you. I'm telling you, if you don't know that yet for yourself, I am telling you right now, there is nothing more important for you than doing this thing. So just begin in the simplest little way that you can, and you're 100% further than you were just moments ago. That's it.
That's a very inspiring way to end. I don't even know what to say, but I agree with you.
I'm sorry, Brandon. I was too good.
It was too darn good, sir. But Evan's right, guys. Follow that thing in your heart. I mean, you can't lose. I think the thing is like, you are 100% ahead because there is no losing. And I think the thing is like, I can say this because I think you really summed the law of beginning up. Just do it. You're okay. It's your heart. It means more than whatever the other thing that is holding you back from it. This fear, this doubt, this whatever.
What are you listening to?
Yeah. Listen to your heart. You don't need to listen to your ego or, any of these things. You don't need to listen to anybody else. And I guess there's no way for me to really sum up what you said any further than what you said, but I can leave my own little personal imparted wisdom on this particular law, which is that it always pissed me off when people told me I couldn't do something. It always pissed me off when people tried to hold me back or suppress me or stop me from doing something that was important to me. And this is my call to action for everybody. It's a little opposite of Evan. Get a little pissed off. Get a little pissed off that the world doesn't, that anybody ever mocks you or knocks you or bullies you or pushes you down or says you can't do that. And just go and do it because you're going to show everybody that it is possible, because it is. And the thing is that, you're going to take one step, and I can tell you this from personal experience. And I put my hand to my heart as I say this. I can tell you this from personal experience. You take your first step, it's lonely. You take your second step, your third step, your fifth, whatever it might be. There's the period of time where it's a little lonely. But then all of a sudden, people will start paying attention, because pretty soon you're going to get into momentum. You're going to get into that. You're going to get into this. If you keep following your heart, you're going to, the rise of the phoenix is going to come out of you. And people are going to see you, wave your feathers, put your wings out and fly, and they're going to go, I want to do that too.
Yeah.
Now here's the thing, and I said this to you earlier today, and this is the thing I'm kind of calling everyone to action about, is that it's hard to fly with the eagles when you're hanging with the pigeons. And my motto right now in my life is I want to separate the pigeons from the eagles. So I am going to say things that are so bold and audacious that they will piss off the pigeons, because I want to know who you are. Identify yourself so you can get out of my way, because I don't need you around. I'm looking for eagles, right? And you can do the same. And if you're lonely without the pigeons, don't worry, because the eagles are going to find you when you put your wings out. If you like that little analogy there. And that's beginning. Beginning is you spreading your wings, is you saying, you know what? I can fly. I can do something. Who knows where you'll fly? Who knows where you go? We don't know. This is the beginning. It's exciting. But let yourself have that first step. You'll be okay. Yeah, you're jumping from the nest. Yeah, you might fall and hit the ground. It's probably not going to be as bad as you think. Just go and do this thing, And I think if you're listening to this and you're still here, you are clearly ready.
Yeah, definitely. If you're listening to this, you are ready to do this. Thanks for listening to the show. If you got something out of this, if you feel it improved your life or your journey in any way, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share the episode.
You can also support us on Patreon, where we have tons of great bonuses. You are the ones that make the show possible and help us to thrive. Thank you for joining us.